Hey, welcome back. So the next big animation topic we'll cover has to do with keyframe animations. Now, keyframes are another tool in the CSS animation arsenal, but unlike transitions, they allow us to build much more complex, multi-component, multi-state animations. And on top of that, they also allow us a lot more control over the details of how the animation works. Things like the timing, when it starts, how many times it repeats, and so on. So we'll see how they work in just a moment. But first, let's compare them to what we know, transitions. So transitions allow us to animate a single state change. We have a red circle, and it changes to a yellow circle, and we can tell it how long that transition should take. Or we have a square, and it's actually animating to a circle because of border radius, and so on. Or we can have multiple things that are changing at once, right? We could have a square that's changing to a circle, and at the same time, the background color changes, but it's one state to another state, a start and an end. Keyframes allow for much more complex multi-state animations, so that we don't just have a beginning and end point, but we can define as many in-between points as we want. So that's really, really important to making complex, awesome animations. So here's a little diagram I made for transitions. We can go from state A to state B. Here we have an orange circle going to a red circle, and we have control over how long it takes, the timing function, if there's a delay, but that's pretty much it. But with keyframes, we can do things like this. Let's say we have that same orange circle, and we want it to end up as a red circle. We could do that with a transition, but what about if we want other things to happen along the way? Well, suppose this is mimicking a sun. So we have sunrise and sunset. What we want to happen in between is the sun is going to rise up using transform translate, and it's going to change color. It's going to become yellow in the middle of the day. So we could move the sun up and over to the right. We could make it a little bit lighter orange, and then we could continue that, make it yellow at the middle of the day, and move it upwards and to the right. And then maybe this is noon. Towards the afternoon, it moves back down, stays yellow, and then finally it ends up as red at the end. So rather than going directly from A to E in this case, or A to B, we're actually going A to B to C to D to E. So we have a lot more control. We can define these points along the way that we want things to happen at. So I can say exactly halfway through, if this is the beginning and this is the end, exactly halfway through it should be, let's say, 300 pixels up and 300 pixels over, and it should be yellow. And then I could say, well, actually in between that, at 25% of the way through or 75%, we can define these key frames, hence the term keyframe. So later on, we'll actually have an exercise where we build a rising sun like this, rising/setting, and we also will have a sky in the background that's changing to the appropriate color, if it's sunrise or sunset, noon, nighttime, and so on. So that's coming up. But let's start off with something a little bit tackier, a little flashier. We're going to make some animated text that flashes the colors of a rainbow while also growing and shrinking. Maybe sort of a throwback to like early 90s internet ads. And the reason we're going to do this is that I think it will help explain how keyframes work and the basic structure of them. So here I have a timeline. It goes from 0 to the end of the animation, the very beginning to the end, 0 and 100. And the way that keyframes work is that along that interval, we can define at any point that we want a keyframe. I can say that halfway through, something should happen, or 1% of the way through, or 79% of the way through, something else should happen. Now, I'm only going to do very basic ones here. As you can see, we've got, 25%, 50, 75%, and 100%. So I've broken it into quarters, but we could continue to break this or break it into uneven intervals, which we'll see later on. So what we're going to do again is have some text. Let's say it's a paragraph. And at the beginning, I can say, okay, at 0%, it should be red, color of red, and the font size should be 20 pixels. And then at 25%, color should be orange. Then at 50%, the color should change to yellow, and the font size should be 40 pixels. So what will happen is that from 0 to 25, it'll go from red to orange. 25 to 50, it'll go from orange to yellow. But then we have font size, and we only specify it at 0 and 50. So that font size will change from 20 to 40 evenly across this interval here. So we don't have to specify we want it to be 30 pixels here. So then at 75%, we'll change color to green, and then at 100%, we'll change color to blue, and font size will go back to 20. So what will happen, let's just focus on the color, is that it will change fade between red, orange, yellow, green, and blue. So it won't be these instantaneous flashes. Rather, there will be a fade between them. And then we have font size that will start at 20 pixels, but then in the middle of the animation, it will have enlarged to 40, and then it will shrink back down to 20. So here we could sort of visualize what it would look like. If we have the text hello as red, then it grows a little bit and changes to orange at 25%. Then it grows to its peak, hello, as it turns yellow. And then it shrinks back down and changes green, and then it goes all the way back to the initial size and is blue. But now imagine that rather than being displayed as a timeline, this is happening in real time, and you would see something like this. Very cheesy, like I said, not the prettiest thing you've ever seen, but I think it illustrates in a very, very simple way how keyframes work. And this is something that you could not do with transitions. You could have a single transition from here to here or from here to here, but we can't specify all these steps along the way. The last thing I want to do is showcase a couple of fun, cool animations I found on CodePen that are built using CSS keyframes. So here's a walking cat. And as you can see, there's a couple of animated components. We've got this background scrolling by, and then we've also got this cat that's moving. So this is definitely tricky to make it look good, obviously, to have these assets and to know how to animate something to make it lifelike. Very, very difficult. But underlying it is some pretty simple core concepts, the same keyframes. Here's another example, little pixel art tree with a flashing star on top and falling snow. So this is all dictated with keyframes. Although there's a lot of things that are being animated, this is definitely a lot of CSS behind this. But if we looked at a single thing, let's say this star here, there's a couple of keyframes. At the beginning, it's small perhaps, and then it grows, and then it shrinks back down, sort of like we did with that rainbow text. Here's a fun one, Mr. Jellyfish, pure CSS animation. So we've got a bunch of bubbles rising up. Then we also have the jellyfish who has moving tentacles. It has eyes that blink. And it also has this little, fin up top that's moving and a shadow that's moving along with it. So there's a lot of things going on here, but underlying it is CSS keyframes. And then finally, this one is maybe the least exciting, but it's actually very difficult and impressive in my opinion, this clock here. There's a lot of things happening. So it actually works. The time itself isn't accurate, but it works in the sense that the hour hand, the minute hand, the second hand are moving at the correct speeds. And we have an updating readout down here as well. So the animation here is not that difficult. It just involves using rotate. But there's a lot of things that are happening at the same time and a lot of timekeeping underlying it. Okay, so I'll leave it here. In this video, we sort of had a conceptual overview of keyframes. We saw roughly how they work, but we actually haven't implemented them. We haven't seen the syntax. So in the next video, we're going to make this very simple rainbow animation, but actually write the code and see the keyframe syntax.